for spirit, sweet spirit, is in this very room, in this very room.
And I want to thank Jackie, who gave a wonderful lesson for us last week on decisions. And if you weren't here last week, watch the video because it's really a very good lesson. And so thank you, Jackie. That was great. Well, okay. It's a new year. We're going to be looking at some new awarenesses and new insights and some old awarenesses and insights as well. And I was brought back into an awareness of one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Reverend Michael Bernard Beckwith. How many of you are familiar with Michael Beckwith? Yeah. Michael's just a very powerful teacher, and he's founded the Agape Center out in Los Angeles, California, and he teaches and preaches to thousands, and I think even hundreds of thousands probably, in that center and then around the world, and has written some amazing works. And I was reminded of some of his work, and a great book that he's written. If you've not read this book, it's called Spiritual Liberation, Fulfilling Your Soul's Purpose. And one of the most beautiful courses and classes that we had up at Unity in Woodinville when I was there was following this book. And it was really very uplifting and enlightening in so many ways. And I was reminded, though, of a lesson that he has and a book that he has and a teaching that he has called Life Visioning. And as I was preparing my lesson, I came across this story. I was reminded of a story, and there was a man that was in a really nice 5-star hotel and having his breakfast and getting ready to order. And the waiter came over, and this is a really nice restaurant, you know. It's really one of the top restaurants, really. And so he said to the waiter, says, "Well, I'll tell you what I want. I want coffee, toast, and eggs, and I want my toast be burnt, and I want my coffee bitter, and I want my eggs basically raw." And the waiter kind of looked at him and said, "Sir, I'm sorry, but we can't serve that to you. We don't serve that kind of food here." And I said, he says, "Well, no, that's what I want." And he said, he said, "I'm willing to pay you whatever it takes for me to have what I want." And he said, "Sir, I'm sorry, we can't do that." And he says, "Well, I don't understand why not. That's exactly what I got yesterday." And so the question that comes to my mind is, what kind of order are we putting out to the universe? Are we putting out an order that is kind of the same kind of thing we got yesterday we didn't really care much for? Or are we putting out an order to the universe of what we truly want and have in our life? And as I was thinking about that, it occurred to me and was reminded of Michael Beckwith has an understanding, a model that came to him in his times of meditation and prayer, of how the different stages that we're at as we grow spiritually. And these stages, interestingly enough, one of them is not good or bad. They're all a part of our unfolding as a spiritual being. And so he has this model of 4 different stages that we go through as we begin to learn and to grow and develop spiritually. And it occurs to me that we're all, one of the things he says is that we're infinite beings, so these 4 stages are not the only stages, but it's just a roadmap or a way of kind of understanding where we are in terms of our thinking and our consciousness and our evolution and our evolving nature in different areas of our life. And the interesting thing about it is that we can be at any of these stages in certain areas. We could be at a very advanced level spiritually in some ways, but also in a very beginning level in other ways. So the first stage that he talks about is victim consciousness. Now you would think that why is it that is part of our spiritual development? But the truth of the matter is that we all at some time or another find ourselves in victim consciousness. And sometimes we find ourselves in victim consciousness in certain areas of life, and we're actually at a very higher level in other areas of life. And sometimes, even in this area that we're in a higher energy or higher awareness, a higher consciousness, something comes along and all of a sudden we're back down in this victim consciousness. And we get to go through the stages all over again. Isn't that interesting? And so really, to me, it is a great way of kind of helping us to understand a little bit about where we are in our own spiritual path. And one of the things about victim consciousness is we can tell when we're in victim consciousness when we find that we are looking for something or someone to give us what we want or need. And we're making them responsible for that. Now, we do that in terms of our happiness. Victim consciousness is believing that something or someone out here is going to make us happy. Believing that something or someone out here has our good. And that we can't have that good unless they are doing and being, saying, acting, living exactly the way that we think they're supposed to. How many of you have someone in your life that thinks, acts, speaks, lives exactly the way you think they're supposed to? Can you see where you get stuck? And so if you are dependent on that person, place, situation, or thing to be the way you think it's supposed to be in order for you to experience who you truly are and the wholeness of your nature and being, you're in victim consciousness. The moment that you think that there's a circumstance out here that has to be the way you think it's supposed to be in order for you to experience your well-being, you've basically made that your God. That person, that place, that situation, that circumstance, you've given it the power to make you happy. But you've also given it the power to make you sad because it's usually oftentimes not showing up the way you think it's supposed to. Sound familiar? And Louise Hay basically says the only reason we ever get angry with anybody is because they're not being the way we think they're supposed to be. And so you can pretty much tell you're in victim consciousness if you're blaming. I mean, even if it is their fault, if you're blaming them, did you catch that? Blame is one of the sure signs that we're living in a place of victim consciousness. Now, one of the things that Michael says is that, interestingly enough, that going through victim consciousness is a part of our spiritual evolution. It's part of our spiritual development. Because one of the things that happens when we're victim consciousness is we get over and over again reminders of how being in victim consciousness doesn't work for us. That we actually are given opportunities to learn that that is not how the universe works. And that we have other levels of understanding. And the second stage of spiritual development is beginning to recognize and begin to realize that it is not what goes on out here that determines our wholeness, our sense of worth, our sense of well-being, but it really is dependent upon, and what is manifested is what goes on in us. What shows up in our life. And so he calls this second stage manifesting consciousness. And that's an important step to move out of the victim consciousness. It is that level of awareness where we begin to own and recognize and begin to at least begin to accept the possibility that we might have something to do with what's going on out here. Even if we just begin to be open and willing to consider that there might be some way that we are contributing. I like to say we either are creating or promoting or allowing or contributing to what is showing up in our life. Now, part of the evolution in understanding and awareness is to begin to recognize that our thoughts, our feelings, our attitudes, our beliefs are creative powers, and that we are creative beings. And as a result of that, we are participating in the creation of what's showing up in our experiences in life. Eric Butterworth says it this way, the question that we begin to ask the question or look at the possibility, what's in this from me? What's in this situation, circumstance from me? Now, oftentimes when I ask that question of a circumstance or situation, I don't always get an answer right away. But if I'm open to the possibility that there's something in my awareness and something in my consciousness, whether it be consciously aware or unconsciously holding, you see, we're programmed with patterns from the time that we come into this world. We're programmed with patterns, and that's not making us victims, because reality is that we are choosing to take on different programs and patterns on some level so that we can learn whatever lesson needs to happen for us in that circumstance or situation. So we can really begin to get this understanding of our power and ability to create circumstances and situations in our lives. And so we are given opportunities to unfold in ways that allow us to see what it is that's coming up in our awareness and our consciousness that is contributing to what's going on in the world. Now, I'm of the opinion, of the belief system, just my view, is that we are participating in creating what's going on in the world, not only in our personal lives, but on a larger scale. I am convinced that a lot of what's going on in our country and in our world today is because we have a lot of people who are really stuck in victim consciousness. Pretty obvious to see in the newspaper. Have you ever read a newspaper article about something going on in the world that didn't look for someone to blame? That is in itself victim consciousness. It's basically saying there's something or someone out here there's a problem and it's their fault. They did it. And that kind of thinking keeps us stuck. It keeps us stuck in experiencing those same kind of things over and over again. So we see the same kind of patterns going over and over again in our politics. We see it in just world situations. And so until we begin, and part of the thing that I'm convinced of, and I was listening to an interview with Michael Beckwith recently, and one of the things I'm certain of is that our world is really moving and shifting out of that, believe it or not. And part of the turmoil that we're seeing and experiencing is that the world is moving out of that and people are fighting against it. There's resistance to accepting responsibility for creating our lives and world. Not that anybody here has any resistance to that, and of course, we never resist that, right? We always know and we always recognize that we are, and we always accept our own place in creating life, right? No. We all know that that's not true. We wouldn't be here today, in all honesty, if we didn't know that there was some other awareness that we're working toward and we're striving, and that includes me, folks. I've shared this over and over again a number of times. Is my lessons are my lessons, and I just get to share them with you, right? So these are my lessons for the week, is to remember and recognize that, sometimes I find myself wanting to blame. And then I began to say, okay, now wait a minute. maybe they have something to do with it, but wait a minute, what's in this from me? What is it in me that's drawn this into my awareness and drawn this into my experience? Because I'm absolutely convinced that we only have those experiences in our awareness that are there to help us move into another level of our spiritual development. And so stage 2 is beginning to recognize that and recognize, he calls it manifestor consciousness. And that's where we begin to recognize that our thoughts are creating our experiences, and we begin to work with that in such a way that we begin to do our affirmations and we envision and we see things the way we want to see them. And I can tell you, it will make a difference in life. It will make a difference in our world. But oftentimes that level of, or that stage, as he describes it, of spiritual development, we are still in some ways trying to get something. We're trying to get the world to show up the way we think it ought to be still. And that's nothing wrong with that. It's a very powerful place to be. It's really a place that moves us in our evolution and in our spiritual development, our spiritual growth. And so it's important to learn and to practice and to train our thoughts, our feelings, attitudes, and beliefs in such a way that we are experiencing life from a much more full and effective way of being in the world. And so that's part of our spiritual evolution, is moving from the victim consciousness where everything is happening to me. The world is happening to me. The circumstances are determining who I am and what I'm about and my well-being in life, to a level of understanding that the world is happening by me. Things are happening by me. That I am in some way creating circumstances and situations in consciousness that are attracting and facilitating, as I like to say, creating, promoting, allowing, or contributing to circumstances or to situations or people showing up in our life that really push our buttons or give us joy. And there's nothing wrong with that. These are all important part of our evolution. But then there's another level. There's another level that Michael Beckwith talks about, and this is the third stage of consciousnness. And the third stage of consciousness doesn't necessarily negate the other two, because at times we are in those other two, and those are powerful places to be, because there's great power and lessons in learning that happens as a result of all of these different stages. So the next level is to begin to recognize that there is something that is at work that is more than my consciousness, more than my limited consciousness, more than the consciousness that I am a part of. And there's a higher understanding, there's a higher energy, there's a higher consciousness that is ultimately working for my good. And he calls this surrender consciousness. And it's a level of awareness and evolution in our spiritual growth where we begin to not so much, what's the best way to describe it? We still set clear intentions. We still are involved in visualizing. We're still involved in knowing that our thoughts and attitudes and beliefs are creating circumstances and experiences. But it's not so much a matter of getting as it is a matter of becoming. It's really more about us growing into a greater experience and expression of our true nature. Growing into and it's an awareness that we are, that there's something that's happening and does happen and can happen through us when we surrender, when we let go, when we allow. This is a big word. The word allow is an important word. And it's an important word when you really begin to understand the law of mind action, the law of attraction. How many of you are familiar with Abraham Hicks' work? Yeah, the law of attraction, one of the things that they teach that is so powerful is this energy of allowing. And so I want to read to, actually, This is something that I thought was really fascinating. Let me find it. From Ken Wilber. How many are familiar with Ken Wilber? So Ken Wilber is a powerful teacher, and one of the things, here it is. He's a great philosopher and a powerful teacher, and he said that whenever you see a roadmap of consciousness, we always seem to assume ourselves to be one stage higher than we truly are. And so part of this is just noticing our own awareness of who and what we are and where we are. And the thing that about this is really powerful is that we are learning how to be in the world and be in the world in such a way that we are not allowing ourselves to be ruled by what goes on out here, but by participating and helping to form and shape and create other situations and circumstances. And so that's participating in a way that is not demanding or commanding that the world be the way we think it's supposed to be, but simply setting clear awareness and intention of of the direction that we want life to flow through us. And then by setting that clear intention of how we want life to flow through us, we then have to let go and allow life to flow through us. We have to allow a higher awareness to work in ways that we can't consciously understand, we can't consciously at times even comprehend, and it sometimes will show up in exactly the way that we intended, and other times it will show up in ways that we hadn't even imagined, and ultimately those will either be an opportunity for us to grow another level, or an opportunity for us to bask in the beauty and the wonder and the glory of this universe that is continually trying to bless us in some way. On Sundays, I need a little help from some of my crew here to help me remind this, but we have a circle before our services to set our clear awareness here in the service. And we didn't do it this morning. I've because of other things that I get involved in, I've forgotten to do that. So I'm going to invite you to join me in having that circle right here this morning. And one of the things that we pray in that circle is, it is not I, but the Spirit of God within that does the work. It is not I, but the Spirit of God within that does the work. Will you affirm that with me? It is not I, but the Spirit of God within that does the work. And so we hold this energy in this group, in this consciousness, that we're here to allow that Spirit to do whatever work is there for us to do. And if we allow that, it's amazing how things come through in a way that we hadn't planned, but come through in ways that really help us to experience the blessings or the lesson. Does that make sense? And then there's a fourth level of evolution. And there have been times that I have experienced this for that long. And so part of my unfolding is to begin to have more experiences like that and to have them extended. And that is that part of us that is indestructible, that is unlimited, that is unchangeable. There is that part of our awareness that we move into our stage of evolution where we just realize and recognize, I am one with Spirit. And that's where the universe is not happening to me, it's not happening by me, and it's not even happening through me, but it's actually happening as me. It's a level of evolution where we move into an understanding of, and it's not even understanding, it's just a knowing of our divine nature. And that we are, interestingly enough, at the center of all being. and that all being is in the center of us. And it's those mystical kinds of experiences that and so we take this opportunity, as Jesus said, to go into our room and pray and close the door. And what he means by that is to close the door to identifying with circumstances, with the outer world, and to move into that space within us, in this very room of our hearts, our minds, our energy, our consciousness. And as we move into that place, we allow ourselves to just notice those situations and circumstances in life that we have felt victimized by and believed that that they had power over us, whether it be a person or a situation or a circumstance. And begin to evolve our awareness and be open to the possibility, to knowing that there may be something in our energy, our consciousness, that is helping to draw that circumstance or situation into our awareness so that we can learn from it or simply release it. And we move into that place within ourselves where we're just simply open and surrendering and allowing of Spirit to move us into a higher possibility of blessing, of good, of our own nature, of our own being, so that we can express more of the authentic and true life of our being. And as we allow that higher awareness, that higher energy, that higher vibration to move through us, and it begins to move us in circumstances and situations in ways that are from a higher perspective, we're able to see life in a grander way, from a higher vision. And we're being guided and directed to move in such ways that allow us to transcend the circumstances, the situations, and the beliefs in our victimhood. And as we breathe into and move into deeper into that room of our consciousness, we're open to knowing and feeling and experiencing our connection. Not just a connection, but our identification, our identity as the essence of the divine. That we are created in the image and after the likeness of that which is always creating, that is indestructible, that is unlimited, that is always moving and expressing and vibrating at a level of absolute benevolence and good and love and light. And that is who we truly are. And as we begin to vibrate with that kind of energy and that kind of consciousness, we find and know that there is an emanation happening. And life is beginning to vibrate for us in a higher way. In a way that reflects the beauty and the wonder and the magnificence of Spirit. And so now just begin to breathe into that knowing and that assurance and trust and know that all is well. All is well. Take a nice deep breath now. Breathe into the heart space. Begin to allow yourself to be conscious and aware of being here in this room, in this time, in this place, as a unique expression of the one presence and the one power. And know that all is well. Take another nice deep breath and gently open your eyes. And so it is.